Hello and welcome to my YouTube channel. This is candidate master Viktor Neustroev, and today I want to show you what happened in the fourth game of the championship match between current champion Magnus Carlsen and the challenger Fabiano Caruana. In the fourth game, which ended also in a draw, Magnus Carlsen was playing with white pieces and Fabiano Caruana was black. However, even with white pieces, the champion didn't have enough advantage to win. Okay, let me show you. The game started with c4 move. That's a English opening. e5 then, knight c3, knight f6, knight f3, knight c6, g3, and then black played d5. That's a kind of open Sicilian, but now black is playing as white, and white is like black. So it's a reversed line of Sicilian. C takes on d5, knight takes on d5, bishop g2. And in this position, the most common move, the move that make almost every player, is knight to b6. However, there is a kind of novelty played 1 year ago, bishop c5 move. No, I can't say that it's a novelty, but this move makes sense, and after this move there is no tactics with knight e5 with the idea to put more pressure on this knight. So bishop c5 is okay, and it's also a playable move. Moreover, nowadays strong grandmasters prefer this move rather than knight b6. However, there are a lot of games with knight b6. Okay, castle, castle, and d3. That was happened in the game. What if, for example, knight e5, the tactic that I mentioned? Then black takes on c3. The queen is under attack. So b takes on c3. Knight takes on e5 and d4. Bishop d6, d takes on e5, bishop e5, rook b1. If now black takes on c3, then the pawn on b7 will be hanging. So white takes on b7, and it's and the pawn structure, the a7 pawn and the c7 pawn, will be weak without the b pawn. That's why c6 and then just simply queen c2. And this position is considered approximately equal. So there is no tactics. If, for example, here we play knight takes on c6, then knight d1, knight d8, and finally bishop f2, with the idea to trade two minor pieces for the rook, because the knight standing here is trapped. So if rook f2, then knight takes on f2, then, for example, knight takes on b7, but knight h3 check. So bishop takes h3, bishop takes on h3, and then knight goes to c5, for example. Let's calculate the material. Black has an extra exchange and white has only one pawn compensation, so black is much better in this position. If, for example, after bishop f2 he goes to h1 with the king, then just bishop g4 can be played, with the idea to take on e2, and this is a winning position for black. So you see, in this position he can't take on c6. The only move he can do is to take on c3 with the b pawn. So knight e5 doesn't work. Of course, both players knew that, so d3 was played. Rook e8. Another option here was to play bishop b6. that was played by Alexander Grishuk against Pavel Ilyanov. Since that game 1 year ago, many players have picked up the idea to develop the bishop to c5. Okay, d3, and then in the game it was rook e8. Bishop d2. Another possible move was knight g5. What is the idea of this move? First, we attack the knight. Knight retreats, but then queen b3, putting more pressure on f7. Queen e7, knight d5, knight takes knight, bishop takes, so more pressure on f7, then knight d8. Looks like white puts a lot of pressure on black's position, so f7 is a weakness. Black has to protect it, and black has to locate his pieces very passively, but it's difficult for white to intensify the pressure in this position. For example, queen c4 with the idea to get the queen to e4, and bishop d4. Bishop goes back to g2, h6, and the knight has to retreat. Knight c6, bishop e3. This is a typical maneuver, and it's okay for white to double the pawns here, because the e3 pawn controls the key square here, the d4 square. But after this move, e4, d takes on e4, so black sacrificed one pawn, but he tripled the pawns for white. So that's why black has a compensation for the sacrificed pawn. So this bishop is now a bad bishop. Okay, let's go back to the game. Instead of knight g5 in this position, it was played bishop to d2. Knight takes on c3 and bishop takes on c3. What if, for example, pawn takes on c3? If so, then black can continue with bishop g4, queen d7, and e4, so centralizing his pieces. The position will be equal. Okay, so moreover, when the pawn is on c3, the bishop has nothing to do on d2. That's the square for the knight usually. Bishop c3, knight d4 was played. If, for example, let's say a5, then knight takes a5, knight takes a5, d4. Then d takes on a5, and he can't take on e5 with the bishop because we take the queen, and the bishop on e5 will be not protected by the rook. So that was a threat. That's why in this position Caruana played knight d4. There was one more game between Wesley So and Fabiano Caruana, and it was a blitz game, and it was played rook c1 in that position. So I believe Magnus Carlsen analyzed this game, and he decided not to play this move because he considered that Fabiano will be comfortable after rook c1. Because in that game it was bishop b6, rook e1, bishop g4, bishop takes on d4, pawn takes on d4, and then after a few moves black could create some pressure on the e-file and the initiative. However, this game ended in a draw. I believe there were a few mistakes because it's a blitz game. That's why instead of rook c1, Magnus Carlsen decided to play b4. That's a kind of a novelty. However, that's a typical move for such positions. You see, the main idea here is the pressure of the bishop. The bishop attacks the pawn on b7, and if black plays c6 at some moment, then b5 can cause some problems to that pawn, and then white attacks the weakness on c6. Okay, so b4, bishop d6. If, for example, bishop f8, knight takes e5, rook takes e5, and e3. winning the piece back. If, for example, bishop b6, then a4 with the initiative. So bishop d6 was played, rook b1. If, for example, we play this move, bishop d4, it takes on d4, knight d4, then bishop g3, h takes on g3, queen takes on d4, and queen d2. Maybe white is slightly better, but generally speaking the position is equal, and definitely there is not enough advantage to win. And moreover, that's an open position, so there is no clear plan for white how to try to exploit the weaknesses. Moreover, there are not so many weaknesses, only the b7 pawn is a weakness. Okay, let's go back, let's stick to the game. So instead of taking on d4, it was after bishop d6 it was played rook b1. Knight takes on f3, bishop takes on f3, a6, a4, and c6. And in this position, Magnus Carlsen played rook e1. I believe that was the main mistake in this position, in the whole game. I can't explain why he didn't play b5. Because b5 provides white with the clear advantage. I'm not sure if it's enough to win, but anyway the position will be better than the position that happened in the game. So b5, a takes on b5, a takes on b5. Then bishop d7. Pawn takes on c6, bishop takes on c6, bishop takes bishop, pawn takes bishop, and queen c2. And this position, white is slightly better because of the weakness on c6. Maybe Magnus Carlsen decided that Fabiano Caruana is prepared for b5. Maybe he thought that Fabiano Caruana analyzed it at home, this line or this motive and this position. However, maybe there is another idea, not to take with the a pawn, but to take with the c pawn. A takes on b5 and a5. However, I believe even in this position, white is better. He can activate the queen, activate the bishop, putting it to e3, and rook f to c1 with some pressure. Okay, so rook e1 was played in the game. Bishop d7 to prevent b5. a3, queen f6. Bishop e4. Bishop f5. Another possible move was just to play rook a to d8. But black decided to simplify the position. That's why bishop to f5 and queen f3. So Magnus Carlsen is really good in the endgame, so maybe that's why he decided to pass the game into the endgame and try to get some chances. So black's king side pawn structure is not good, but there is no way to exploit these weaknesses. Moreover, they are not weaknesses because we can't attack them. I would say that the position could be better for white in case if white can advance the pawn to b5. But unfortunately for white, on the next move, black played b5, fixing the pawn structure and fixing the b4 pawn, because now this pawn is a weakness. Rook e to d1, bishop goes to f8. Then a takes on b5, a takes on b5, opening the a file for black. If, for example, c takes on b5, it can be met by bishop e1, rook e c8, rook d c1. So, and now you see black can't attack these pawns. because rook c8, then this rook will be taken, and then c4 will be a weakness. So let's stick to the game. A takes on b5, a takes on b5, then king g2. If only white can get his king to f5, that will be really good, but it's impossible in this position. Rook e d8, rook d to c1. Well, that's a clear idea to put some pressure on the weakness on c6. King g7, bishop e1, rook d to c8, protecting the pawn on c6. Rook c2, rook a4. So now it's hard to improve white position because his pieces are tied down to the b4 pawn. King f3 was played then. Maybe it makes sense to play g4 to fix the f pawns. However, king f3, h5, king e2, king g6, h3, f5. E takes on f5, king takes on f5. So now black is fine with his king. He centralized it. f3 to prevent king to e4. Bishop e7. So this position is absolutely equal with no chances for both sides. So black could win only in case if he creates a distant passed pawn on the queen side, which looks impossible in this position. White can win in case if he takes the pawn on c6, but he can't do this because two of his pieces are tied down to the b4 pawn, which is also a weakness. Okay, then they continued e4, check, king goes to e6, bishop d2, so if, for example, here rook c1, then king d7 protecting the pawn. And the next move is bishop takes on b4. That's why here white has to play rook b1 back. So that's why bishop d2 instead of rook b to c1. Bishop d6 was played in the game, and after rook b to c1, they agreed to a draw. So king d7, and that's a draw. Maybe we can try to analyze this position, this trade. Bishop takes on b4, bishop takes bishop, rook takes bishop, rook takes on c6, rook takes on c6, rook c6 check, then king e7. If, for example, king d7, then rook f6, and the king has to go back to e7. That will be the same position. King e7, rook h6, and I think the best way to make it draw is to play rook b2. King e1, rook g2, rook takes on h5, king d6. The idea is to get the king closer to the b pawn and try to advance the pawn with the help of the king. g4, b4, king d1. So white decides to white can stop the b pawn with the king. b3, king c1. Now black can't succeed without the help of their king. That's why king to c5, rook takes e5, king c4, f4. And there is no way for black to improve the position. If he goes with the king to c3, then rook c5, immediate check, and then the rook goes to b5 to control the b pawn. If just any moves with the rook, then white plays rook e8 or rook e7, and then there will be a lot of checks from behind. That's why the best way for black in this position is just to repeat the checks. Rook g1, king b2, rook g2, king b1, rook g1, and of course not king a3, because rook a2 is a checkmate. So that was the game between Magnus Carlsen and Fabiano Caruana. The score in the match is 2-2. So 4 draws. I believe there should be something interesting in the 5th game. See you.